When we talk about VMware data protection in this lesson, we're talking more generically, not about the specific VMware product called VDP or VMware data protection, but at a higher level across the board, all different forms of data protection. And that's because VMware vSphere Data Protection, also known as VDP, has been announced as end of availability. In past courses here at Pluralsight, I had entire modules, and I believe even at one point, an entire course dedicated just to VMware's backup and recovery tool called VDP or vSphere Data Protection. For better or for worse, VMware has discontinued that tool effectively, better known as end of availability or EOA, but they still do offer a number of forms of data protection, specifically vSphere replication, which we'll cover in this module. vSphere replication is software-based replication. You install virtual appliances on each of the two vCenters where you intend to perform the replication, and then you're able to replicate your virtual machines on an ongoing basis between, most likely, two different data centers. VMware also offers what they call SRM, or Site Recovery Manager. Site Recovery Manager is used for orchestrated disaster recovery, and it can work in conjunction with vSphere replication because the job of vSphere replication is really just to move virtual machines and virtual machine changes from one site to another, whereas Site Recovery Manager is used to plan exactly what will happen with that replicated data and those replicated virtual machines, what order they'll be brought back up in, and exactly what will happen when you push the button to recover your vSphere infrastructure at a disaster recovery site. VMware also offers snapshots, of course, built into vSphere. Now, snapshots are not backup and recovery, but they are a great way to protect your data before you perform an upgrade or make an important configuration change. We learned about snapshots previously in this course. The point being here that there are multiple types of data protection, and each one has its own unique purpose. You have backup and recovery, which is typically used to recover virtual machines or individual files or applications from virtual machines, either at an on-premises data center from the local backup repository, or it could be used for disaster recovery, but typically it's not a very rapid form of disaster recovery. And then you have more dedicated disaster recovery tools that perform either asynchronous or synchronous replication. They could be hardware-based or software-based, and they're used to rapidly recover your virtual machines in the event of a small-scale or large-scale disaster. And honestly, there's a lot of blurring. There's a lot of gray space between backup and recovery and disaster recovery. In many cases, they can be one in the same tool. To give you a quick visual of what this landscape might look like, first you have backup and recovery tools, in many cases called data protection tools. However, data protection to me is at a higher level because data protection can also include disaster recovery. But the core function of backup and recovery, just as it has always been, is to back up your data, whether it's a spreadsheet, a word processing document, a PowerPoint document, your email, or a virtual machine that could contain your company's critical data, and then restore that data, whether or not it's an individual file or a database or an entire virtual machine. Now, in many cases, you'll bring back an individual file or a database or even an entire virtual machine, but hopefully it's rare that you have to bring back every piece of data and every virtual machine that you ever backed up in the most recent backup. Unfortunately, today, this is happening more and more due to ransomware infestations. In my mind, backup and recovery is absolutely critical. If your building burns down, you always have to have a copy of your backup data and be able to recover that data into, for example, a co-location site or at another data center in your company. Another form of data protection is the built-in vSphere snapshot functionality. You can use snapshots to protect an individual virtual machine before you make configuration changes or perhaps perform an upgrade. And many backup tools actually use snapshots to preserve the state of the virtual machine before they back it up. However, snapshots should not be considered a backup and recovery tool. Snapshots are used more as a one time use before you perform that upgrade or make that configuration change. While, in my opinion, snapshot recovery is very reliable, you can't always depend on snapshots to get you out of a pinch. You always need to have your backup data available, which should happen because backups should be done on a schedule, for example, every night. And then you have disaster recovery tools. In many cases, backup data is used for disaster recovery, but there are also dedicated disaster recovery tools that aren't typically used to, for example, restore an individual file. They're more used if you have an entire data center loss or a limited data center loss, and you need to get critical applications back up and running much more quickly. Many of these disaster recovery tools use what's called replication to replicate your data through a constant stream from one data center to another or from your data center to the public cloud. Should you have a disaster, either small or large, that replicated data can be quickly used to recover your critical applications. And then you may still use your backup data to recover less critical applications and less critical data after the fact. So that's a quick overview of the different types of data protection options available to you as a vSphere administrator. Like I said, I could do an entire course just on this topic, but hopefully that helps you to understand the big picture and give you some real world examples of both how critical these different data protection options are, as well as which option is used in which scenario. Now, since VMware no longer has their own data protection or backup and recovery tool, I've selected a third-party backup and recovery tool to do a quick demonstration with in this module. And that tool is Veeam. It's one of the most popular tools in the industry today, but I don't want to just highlight Veeam. There are so many great backup and recovery tools out there. In fact, I personally moderate and run a lot of different events where we host a wide variety of data protection tools from a wide variety of different vendors. They have a lot of similarities in the sense that they're all there to recover your data should something unexpected happen, but they also have a lot of differences in terms of exactly what they do, when they do it, and how they do it. So if you're looking for disaster recovery and data protection tools, I encourage you to do your own testing and evaluation. There's so many excellent options out there. No matter what tool you choose, it's just important that you have a tool and that you always have a valid and tested backup so that you can recover your company's critical data and applications, because one day the unexpected will happen. Now, like I said, in our case, I'll be demonstrating for you how to install the free community edition of Veeam Backup and Recovery to protect the virtual machines and data here at the Wired Brain Coffee Company. Here at Pluralsight, we have entire courses on installation, configuration, and administration of Veeam backup and replication. In fact, Veeam even has a certification on administering Veeam backup and replication, and Pluralsight has courses to help you learn what you need to know to get certified. So in this lesson and the next two subsequent lessons, I'm not going to tell you everything you need to know about Veeam backup. The point here is to give you a quick jump start and show you how easy it can be to use a backup and recovery tool to protect your virtual machines. This is the minimum that every vSphere administrator needs to do. Install a backup and recovery tool and protect your virtual machines. And then, hey, don't forget, test that tool to make sure that the backup actually worked and that you can really recover your critical data. The first thing that we're going to do is to select a virtual machine because Veeam Backup runs on a Windows virtual machine. So let's go ahead and take WebWin source and actually use this as our Veeam Backup virtual appliance. So what we'll do is rename this. I'm going to call it Backup Windows Veeam 1. And then we'll go ahead and power this on. We'll open up the console. And once we log in, let's go ahead and rename the computer to match the virtual machine name in vSphere. And we're not going to join this computer to the domain. We're going to keep it a separate standalone virtual machine. And with the virtual machine started back up again, we'll open our web browser, open our search engine, and we'll look for Veeam Community Edition. It's the first choice. And once inside here, we'll click to download the free version of Veeam Community Edition. And if you look here, notice it says it will protect up to 10 workloads and an unlimited amount of ad hoc virtual machine backups. It is free forever, and it offers item level recovery. There is a short form you need to fill out. In my case, I've already got a login. And then it's here that we can download Veeam Backup and Replication Community Edition. We'll give this a moment to complete. With Veeam Backup Community Edition downloaded, I'll click to open the ISO. This will mount the ISO image, and it's here that we'll run setup. Then we're given the option to install Veeam Backup and Replication, as well as a number of other Veeam products. We'll choose Veeam Backup and Replication. We'll accept the license agreements. Click Next. We'll be using the Community Edition, which doesn't require a license, so we can click Next. We'll take the defaults here to install all the Veeam Backup and Replication tools. And there are a few other minimum requirements that we do need to meet, but we can install these and meet these simply by clicking the Install button. With our minimum requirements installed, we'll click Next and Install. This will take just a moment. We'll be right back. And after a few moments, Veeam Backup and Replication is installed successfully. I'll click Finish. And we'll close out the Veeam Backup installer. And you can see the icon for the Veeam Backup and Replication console, which we'll use to start up and connect to the local backup server. And then from here, we simply need to connect Veeam Backup and Replication to our virtual infrastructure. To do that, I'll right-click on the virtual inventory and click Add Server. We'll select VMware vSphere, again VMware vSphere, and type in the host name or IP address of our vCenter server. Provide our credentials. Click Apply. We'll accept the certificate and actually install it. And with a successful connection, we'll click Finish. And then you can see over on the left-hand side, if we expand out our vCenter server, there's the Hilton Head Data Center. If we click on our prod cluster, you can see the virtual machines that are running on that cluster. In our next lesson, I'll show you how easy it is to back up a virtual machine or all your virtual machines to ensure that your company's data and applications are protected. In our next lesson, I'll show you how to create a backup job to protect all of the virtual machines, applications, and data here at the Wired Brain Coffee Company. With Veeam Backup and Replication installed, it's easy to create a backup job. Let me walk you through the process. With Veeam Backup connected to our vCenter server and the inventory downloaded, the first thing we do to create a backup job is to go over and click on, you guessed it, Backup Job. From there, we'll select that we want to back up virtual machines. We'll take the default name for our backup job, and then it's here that you can select to back up all virtual machines connected to a vCenter server, which includes not only virtual machines that are added right now, but all new virtual machines that are added in the future. So this is the best way to ensure that all virtual machines are protected. Of course, you might want to exclude, for example, the vCenter server itself. However, you might also want to exclude, for example, the Veeam Backup server itself right here. and perhaps any other administrative virtual machines that you don't want to protect. And after this, just to get a backup job going, and without too much analysis, we can simply click through here. We'll check to run this job automatically every day, click apply, and then we can select finish right here. And if we want to run the job as soon as this backup job is created, we'll check that box. Now, in our case, to create a quick backup test, I'm going to cancel out of that, and let's just back up an individual virtual machine. In this case, we'll just back up the legacy Windows app, click next. We won't run this job automatically, but we will run it when we finish creating the job. With our backup job completed, let's check the status of the job. You can see backup job 2 here is running. Currently, the status is 0%. Let's give this job a moment to complete, and we'll be right back. And after a few moments, you can see that our backup job did complete successfully. You see the green checkbox here by the success column, the success status. And if we go into the success tab, you can see that our backup job is listed. If we double click on the backup job, you can get additional details about exactly the processing speed, the amount of data that was backed up, as well as the deduplication rate. With a successful backup job, what we're going to do now is something perhaps a little bit scary. We're just going to go in and right-click on this legacy Windows virtual machine, and we'll click delete from disk. I'll click yes, and that will delete the virtual machine. It is completely gone. The only way to get it back now is to use Veeam Backup, and that's exactly what we'll do in our next lesson. With our virtual machine gone, the only way to get it back is to perform a recovery using Veeam Backup and Replication. Let's cross our fingers and give it a try. If we go back to the home screen and then into our inventory, you can see indeed the virtual machine that we protected, the legacy Windows application, is gone. Now what we'll do is to perform a restore job. We'll restore from backup. We'll restore an entire virtual machine. And again, we'll select to restore an entire virtual machine. We will add the virtual machine from backup since it's gone in the infrastructure. There's our backup that we performed on the legacy Windows application virtual machine. I'll click add, next, and we'll choose to restore it to its original location. I'll click next. It's kind of cool here that we can choose to scan the restored virtual machine for malware prior to performing the recovery. We don't want to do that right now in the interest of speed. Let's get this virtual machine up and running. We'll choose to power it on after restoring and click finish. Let's give this a moment to complete and we'll be right back. And with that, as you can see, our virtual machine was successfully restored. You can see the log file here of exactly everything that happened, how much data we restored, 9.8 gigabytes at a rate of 74 megabytes per second. Now, the real test, of course, is if we go over here to the vSphere client, and you can see that our legacy Win application virtual machine was successfully restored. If we click on the console, sure enough, we can log in and our virtual machine is back up and running thanks to the power of our data protection tool, Veeam Backup and Replication. Of course, Veeam Backup and Replication is a great tool for data protection and disaster recovery. I encourage you to check out the community edition, but you don't have to use Veeam. The important thing is to make sure that you have valid backups that are taken frequently and that you can recover should disaster strike. We talked about how there's multiple forms of data protection, and one of those is vSphere replication. In this lesson, I'll walk you through the process of installing and configuring vSphere replication. But before we jump into it, let's first talk about exactly what vSphere replication is and what makes it unique. V vSphere replication is really an extension to vCenter that provides you with hypervisor-based replication of your virtual machines. And when I say hypervisor-based, what that really means is that it's software-based. It's all in the VMware vSphere hypervisor. There's no external storage component of vSphere replication. vSphere replication is included with vSphere Essentials Plus and above. So just about every edition of VMware vSphere includes vSphere replication. And the real benefit to vSphere replication is that it provides you with much lower cost replication for disaster recovery as compared to more traditional SAN-based replication solutions, which are known for being quite expensive. So once you have your backup and recovery solution in place, you want to make sure that you have you want to make sure that you also have a replication solution in place, if nothing else, just for the most critical virtual machines. Now, Veeam backup and replication does include replication, but like I said, it's important to look at all the different options that are available to you, and this one happens to come directly from VMware. You should also know that vSphere replication deploys as a virtual appliance, so there's no operating system to install, really no virtual machine to create. So there's no operating system or application to install, no virtual machine to create. You simply deploy the virtual appliance and the virtual machine is built with operating system, application, with operating system and application already pre-configured. vSphere replication is compatible with many vSphere features, but not all. Yeah, just go to this, please. Here we go. For example, here in the VMware documentation, there is a list. Let's zoom in on this. For example, here in the VMware documentation, there is a list of specific VMware features and whether or not vSphere replication is compatible. For example, you can see that vSphere replication is compatible with vMotion, Storage vMotion, vSphere High Availability, vSphere Distributed Resource Scheduler, Storage Distributed Resource Scheduler, VMware vSAN, Distributed Power Management, and Flash Recache. However, it's not compatible with VMware Fault Tolerance, nor is it compatible with a couple of other lesser important features like the vCloud APIs, vCenter Chargeback, and of course VMware Data Recovery, which is now end of life. So the main feature that it's not compatible with is really vSphere Fault Tolerance. vSphere replication works within sites and also across sites. And in our demonstration with the Wired Brain Coffee Company, since we really don't have multiple sites, we'll be deploying vSphere replication and replicating intra-site or within sites. vSphere replication can protect up to 2,000 virtual machines per VMware vCenter. So this is really powerful, really scalable, and really easy to deploy. To get started installing and configuring vSphere replication, we're going to go over to VMware.com. And here underneath downloads, if you actually go into VMware vSphere and then into VMware vSphere 7, you'll see the vSphere replication virtual appliance listed right here. In this case, it's vSphere replication version 8.3.1. And what I've done is I've already downloaded the 1.2 gigabyte virtual appliance. Now, to deploy it, let's close out these tabs. We'll go back here to the vSphere client. And just like any other virtual appliance, if you right-click on a cluster or a host and go into Deploy OVF Template, you can either provide the exact URL to download it and deploy it, or you can select to upload files if you've already downloaded it. Or you can select to upload files if you've already downloaded the OVF virtual appliance. Or you can select to upload files if you've already downloaded the virtual appliance. In our case, we'll select the virtual appliance that we've already downloaded, click Open, and then here's how easy it is to deploy vSphere replication. And then here in the vSphere client, one of the first things we need to do is actually to mount up this ISO file that we've downloaded. I'll go ahead and double click it here in Mac OS, and it will mount up that ISO file, as you can see here. Then we'll go back to the vSphere client, and then right-click on our cluster and select to deploy an OVF template. It's here that we can select a local file, and we'll choose to select the files that we want to upload. We'll select the location, and then we'll need to go in and specifically select the OVF that we want to deploy. And notice it tells us here we have to do multiple selections. This is a little strange, in my opinion, based on other virtual appliances that I've deployed. But you do have to select the certificate, the NF file, the MF file, the OVF file, and the VMDK file. Specifically, but you do have to select the certificate file, the MF file, the OVF file. No. But you do have to select the OVF certificate, the MF file, the OVF file, and the two VMDKs. We'll click Open. We've selected 5 files. It looks like this has passed the verification checks. I'll click Next, and then I'll simply go through here and take the defaults As you can see, we're deploying vSphere replication. I'll click Next, accept the license agreements. And I know I'm going very quickly, but like I said, this is intended to be somewhat of a crash course on vSphere replication. We can select our deployment configuration, where we'd like to store the vSphere appliance. We're then asked to select a network. Let's go ahead and just select the VM network. And we'll use DHCP for IP address. And we'll use DHCP for IP address configuration, although of course that's not recommended in production environments. Here we'll have to input a password and confirm the password, and then finally provide the IP address of a NTP server. I do want to scroll down here. Let's double check the DNS settings. And let's make sure that we have the correct DNS server. We'll click Next. Let's take a note of this validation message. We may need this. Click Next and Finish. We'll give this a moment to deploy. With our vSphere replication virtual appliance deployed, let's go ahead and power it on. And with vSphere replication deployed, we can go here into the console, and you can see that it recommends we contact the IP address 192.168.1.189, which it received via DHCP, and then :5480 to manage this virtual machine. Let's go ahead and give that a try. We'll log in here as root using the password that we configured. And then we'll need to perform a little bit of configuration here. This will guide us through the process. We'll need to provide our vCenter administrator and username credentials and click Save and Restart. We'll accept the certificate. And with our configuration successfully saved, let's close this out. And then we'll go to the home screen here in VMware vCenter. After you log out and then log back in, hey, Ryan, can you add a fade transition here, please, between these two? And then do some sort of call out around the site recovery link that I'm talking about on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. Thanks. This is what you'll see. Down here at the very bottom left corner, notice where it says Site Recovery Manager. And if you click on that, you should see something like this, where you should see something like this, where it has the status of your vSphere replication virtual appliance. It should say OK. It should have an IP address here and a version number. And then you have the option here to either configure it or open site recovery. Now, keep in mind that vSphere replication can replicate within a single vCenter server, but typically that's not very beneficial because the idea here is to get virtual machines off-site. However, there are some scenarios where replicating within a vCenter server could be helpful, and that's exactly what we'll be configuring in our next lesson. With vSphere replication installed and configured, it's time to perform a replication and then test a failback operation. We're back here in the vSphere web client. We're in the new site recovery menu, and here we have a couple of options. We can either configure vSphere replication, which takes us to the vSphere replication appliance. We've been in there before, but what we really want to do is to open site recovery, which will open a new window. And then what we can do here is to go into view details related to replications within the same vCenter server. So if we view details here, this is where you would configure replications within the same vCenter server. And I stress that because if we go back to the site level and go up here to the dropdown and then back to the home, notice this big button right here that says New Site Pair. If we click on that, you can see this is where we would connect to another vCenter server that's running vSphere replication. And then from there, we would be able to replicate our virtual machines from this site and this vCenter server to our alternate data center, perhaps, where we have our alternate vCenter server and vSphere replication virtual appliance. So this is how you would start to configure vSphere replication from site to site. Now, in the case of the Wired Brain Coffee Company, we don't have multiple sites. And what we're going to instead do is to configure replication within a vCenter server. To do this, we'll click on New here to create the new replication. We'll take the automatically assigned vSphere replication server that we deployed, and then we'll select a virtual machine. Let's say that the Wired Brain Coffee Company has this new Win 10 legacy app, and then we'll select a virtual machine. Let's say that the legacy Windows application running on this virtual machine we consider to be critical. It's badly in need of modernization, but for now, it's simply a legacy app that runs on a Windows virtual machine, and it is indeed critical to the company. So critical at the Wired Brain Coffee Company that we're going to replicate it to another data store within the vSphere infrastructure. So we're replicating from one data store to another data store. In this case, we're replicating from VMware vSAN, and we're going to replicate over to the NFS NAS. Let's click Next. And then at this point, we get to select our recovery point objective, meaning just how critical is the data on this virtual machine? How much data are we willing to lose should we have a disaster? The default falls right about in here at 1 hour, but notice how we can go all the way up to 24 hours or all the way down as low as just 5 minutes. That would mean that should we completely lose this virtual machine, we would have at maximum a 5-minute data loss. We can also enable point-in-time instances, meaning that we retain replicated instances that are converted to snapshots during a recovery should we need some additional copies of this critical virtual machine. Other options here are to quiesce the guest operating system to ensure that applications are essentially frozen and make sure that all transactions are completed. We're not going to do that right now. Let's go ahead and just take the default here and click Next with our 5-minute recovery point objective, or RPO, and click Finish. From here, the new replication is created, and it'll take a moment to synchronize this replication, actually perform the first replication. You can see that we are progressing here already. Let's just give this a moment to complete. And with our replication complete, let's click refresh, and there you go. The status is okay. We replicated 9.7 gigabytes from our vSAN data store to our NFS data store to create a backup replica of this virtual machine. What that means is in the event that something were to happen to this virtual machine, for example, let's go over here. And this was the virtual machine that we replicated, Legacy Win app. And if we were to, for example, power off this virtual machine, and then, yes, we're going to do it, delete this virtual machine on disk. I'll say yes, and the virtual machine is gone. It's gone from the vSAN data store. And now, how do we recover this virtual machine using vSphere replication? First off, we get an error here that vSphere replication is not happy that the virtual machine that it was replicating is now gone. And how are we going to put it back? Well, if we select this virtual machine, what we can do is recover, and we won't be able to perform synchronization with the source machine. That's because the source machine is gone. In our case, we're going to use the latest data, and we're going to power on the virtual machine after recovery. Let's click next. We'll choose to put it back in the Hilton Head, South Carolina data center. We'll put it back on the prod cluster. It tells us that the networking device will be disconnected for safety's sake, and we'll click finish. And let's give this recovery a moment to complete. And with that, you can see that the virtual machine is now in a recovered state. So if we go back to the vSphere client, let's take a look. We'll do a refresh. And right there, we have Legacy Win app. It is powered on. If we check our recent tasks, you can see that the virtual machine was indeed recovered right here. Then it was powered on and registered. So that's how easy it is to perform a recovery with vSphere replication. We deleted a virtual machine on disk, and then we almost immediately recovered roughly a 9 or 10 gigabyte virtual machine disk file to get our virtual machine back up and running fast. At this point, we've talked a lot about different data protection solutions, and you saw many of them in action, including Veeam Backup and Replication, as well as vSphere Site Recovery Manager, and yes, even vSphere Snapshots. So if we were to talk about some specific scenarios, let me go ahead and quiz you now on exactly which solution you would select. The first one being a scenario where you need to recover a file from an accidental deletion. Maybe you have a file server that runs Windows. It runs as a virtual machine in your vSphere infrastructure. Someone deleted an important file. That file was stored in the virtual machine, and you need to get it back. So what tool exactly would you use to recover that individual file? Well, let me give you a moment to think. I would recommend using a backup and recovery tool like Veeam Backup and Replication. Many of these tools have features in place to help you very quickly restore individual pieces of data, such as a file from a Windows file server. Another scenario would be recovery of an entire virtual machine after performing a failed software update. Now, in most cases, before you perform a software update on an important virtual machine, you're going to take a vSphere snapshot. And if the update fails, you have something to immediately revert back to. That is to restore the snapshot and get your applications back up and running. The next scenario is recovery of an entire data center. And it could be from a natural disaster. It could be from a ransomware attack where you need to perform a mass recovery or any other large-scale recovery event. So what would you choose? Well, my recommendation would be to choose a backup and recovery tool such as Veeam Backup and Replication. Of course, you could have replicated every one of your virtual machines in the data center, perhaps using vSphere Replication, but I would say that's pretty uncommon. The more likely scenario is the replication of individual critical virtual machines and then using backup and recovery tools such as Veeam Backup to recover any associated virtual machines that are remaining or end user applications that are critical. And then finally, recovery of an individual user's virtual desktop. Virtual desktops run as virtual machines in the vSphere infrastructure. So let's say that you need to get one of those virtual machines back. Well, if you aren't performing backups of the virtual machine ahead of time, that's going to be rough. It's unlikely that you're going to be using vSphere Replication or Site Recovery Manager to replicate an individual user's virtual desktop. So in that case, your fallback tool is going to be a tool like Veeam Backup and Replication. I hope that that helps to give you better insight into exactly which tool that you would use to protect your virtual machines and to get them back up and running.